David, I'd like to turn to you. Congratulations again on your nomination. One of the things I wanted to point out is when I served as U.S. Ambassador to Japan, one of my top priorities was taking care of my staff and their families. And one of the things, and I've mentioned this in this committee before, one of the things that's most disturbing about the treatment of our diplomats in China has been the way they've been treated. It was earlier discussed the fact that they're not allowed to travel freely. If I think about what happened during COVID, they put some of our staff in containers, held them in isolation in moldy hotel rooms. They took stool samples from them, blood tests for them. I just think it's totally egregious what took place. And in my view, it's just wholly unacceptable. I know that you'll do everything that you can to protect U.S. diplomats and their families in China. I'm just going to ask you this question very quickly. If you receive reports of harassment or abuse, will you immediately report those not only to the Trump administration, but to this committee so that we can act upon it?
Absolutely. In my conversation with the ranking member, this came up as well, and I made that similar commitment then.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to turn to China and their participation with Iran in purchasing Iranian oil. In recent years, over 90% of Iranian oil exports were purchased by China. As I've discussed many times in this committee, the Biden administration's non-enforcement of sanctions against Iran has provided that regime with over $100 billion that they have used, therefore, to go out into the Middle East and foment terror and insecurity. President Trump intends to actually enforce sanctions against Iran. And last month, his administration announced sanctions against the Chinese Teapot oil refinery. That refinery was buying and refining hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Iranian crude oil, and it's the first time that the United States has actually sanctioned a Chinese oil refinery. Some of this oil was even imported to China by ships linked to the Iranian-backed Houthi regime, the same terrorists that are attacking U.S. personnel, commercial vessels, and certainly our ally, Israel. It's yet another example of how Biden's non-enforcement of sanctions funded the very problems that we're spending billions to address right now. So if confirmed, David, do you commit to conveying to the Chinese government in the strongest possible terms that the United States will not tolerate Chinese activities that finance Iran and its terrorist proxy groups, especially those terrorist groups that attack the United States and its allies?
Of course. Along with protecting American personnel in China, this will be one of my top 5 priorities, Senator. Let me say one more thing about this. This is a broad topic. Number one, our sanctions are beginning to not work. The Chinese-Russian trade right now, the sanctions aren't working there on dual-use equipment, primarily because they're denoting those transactions, as you know, in rubles and in renminbi. Also, this is a very perverse conversation that you bring up here. I'll be very brief. The consumption of China goods takes money to China. 73% of their oil consumption is imported. They buy it primarily from Russia and Iran. Those dollars then go to Russia and Iran, and we know how that money ends up in the Ukraine and in Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis' war chest. So we have got to rebalance the world. This goes back to the trade conversation that President Trump is on right now. It's all a big geopolitical strategy that ties in exactly to what you're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. And